tonight. I'm joined by Sir Michael Fabricant, former Conservative MP for Lichfield, formerly Mid Staffordshire since 1992, and also Owen Jones, Guardian columnist. Michael, if I can come to you first of all, how are you marking 100 years to the day since Margaret Thatcher was born?
Well, I'm not doing anything today, and you slightly ruined what, in fact, I am going to be doing, which is on Friday the 24th, I am going with a whole crowd of Midlands Conservative LGBT people to go and see this performance at the Birmingham Rep. So I'm really looking forward to that. But you gave away the punchline.
I'm sorry. How do you reflect on Margaret Thatcher's legacy?
Well, she was a tough leader, and like some tough leaders, including people like Tony Blair, they had vision. They knew what they had to do. And in her day, and it's a long time ago, they had to teach this country that the world didn't owe us all a living. You couldn't just make an Austin Princess, which by, I think, all accounts was a pretty awful car. I suppose now you'll get lots of people phoning in and saying, I had an Austin Princess and it was marvellous. But anyway, she taught the country that you can't make products or deliver services unless people want them elsewhere. And up till then, you had the government subsidising British Leyland, and I just mentioned Birmingham. You had Red Robbo. I mean, many of your listeners won't remember them, but these are people who actually thought, you know, it didn't matter that we didn't work or we were on strike or we made crappy products. It didn't matter because at the end of the day, the government would pay our wages. Well, of course, it's not the government. It's actually you and me, the taxpayer, who were paying their wages.
So transformational, Margaret Thatcher. For you, Owen, I have a feeling you are going to disagree. Your reflections 100 years on.
Well, I think of the entire communities that had their beating hearts stripped away from them. You know, the mines, steelworks, docks, factories vanished so quickly and often replaced with lower paid, insecure jobs. Many of the people who lost their jobs tossed on the scrap heap and demonised as scroungers. We had a financial sector that became totally dominant with pretty catastrophic effects. It paved the way for the severity of the 2008 financial crash, which we have never recovered from, but also really all the terrible consequences. So companies frittering away money rather than investment on things like shareholder dividends or share buybacks. We've had lower annual growth since, and it's less equitably distributed. That means the wealth that is created, that millions of people create through the hard graft, that gets sucked into the bank accounts of a tiny few. So when she took office, the top 1% had 10% of the nation's wealth. Now they've got 20%. And we talk about, competition. I think that's what Michael Fabricant was really kind of selling the wares of Thatcherism. I mean, she flogged off, of course, utilities like water and energy. Anyone who thinks that's led to a some sort of renaissance for water and energy and other utilities. She didn't do rail, but she paved the way for that. That happened under John Major. Right. But, that rip-off bills, rip-off tickets, bad services, leaking pipes, and indeed water, lakes full of effluent. Those are just some examples of a society that ended up more fractured, with wealth sucked into the bank accounts of a tiny few. And frankly, the financial sector made king at the expense of the rest of the economy.
How would you respond to that, Michael?
Well, I enjoyed listening to Owen just now. I would say to him, actually, that the worst water polluter is Welsh water, Dŵr Cymru. I'm in Wales at the moment, actually. And, they're nationalised. They never, ever were privatised. And, I understand where Owen's coming from, but at the end of the day, maybe he doesn't remember what British Rail was like, with stale sandwiches and people who didn't really care whether the passengers were enjoying their trip or not. So, look, there are good things and there are bad things. The closure, I totally agree, of the mines was devastating for the people involved. I would just simply remind Owen and the listeners that, in fact, Belgium and Germany had already closed their coal mines, so it wasn't a unique thing. Yes, she could be harsh at times. The Clause 28 thing was very bad legislation indeed, and that was raised, of course, by Mrs. Thatcher's nemesis, who's going to appear in Birmingham very, very shortly. Clause 28, talking about the non-promotion of homosexuality was so badly phrased as a point of law, it meant that you couldn't discuss it with school kids who had problems, and that was wrong. But I don't think that was intentional. It was simply bad phrasing in the way that the law was drafted. But look, at the end of the day, I would rather have Britain now than the way it was before Thatcher. And you look at the sort of ideal that Owen has, and some others have too, of what Britain could have been like, and that's very much like France now, hugely in debt, the nation on the point of crisis and collapse, and despite probably the most obnoxious Labour government we've ever had under Keir Starmer, and actually Owen might even agree with me, because I was shocked to read that Owen, who is a good, accredited journalist with The Guardian, was refused entry to the Labour Party conference. And by the way, Owen, not that I have a huge say in these things nowadays, you'd be more than welcome to go to the Conservative Party conference.
We're veering slightly off topic here. Very quickly.
The Tories refused me a pass last year after allowing me to go for years. And this year, I was actually, after being allowed in, after asking questions about Israel and Palestine, that's where they've removed my pass.
Right.
On the point he just made about water, he's not true about English and Welsh water was privatised. Can we just be clear about that? They were the only countries in the world to have a fully privatised water and sewage disposal system.
No, that's not right. Dŵr Cymru was never privatised.
Michael, there's a not-for-profit company which runs Welsh water. It's not run publicly. Scottish water is publicly owned, and it has cheaper prices than here. Also, it's reinvested in the industry itself, which means, higher per capita investment in the water system. It's a really bad example. But more generally, you say, where could we have ended up, other countries being a disaster? Well, a lot of people would look at Nordic countries like Sweden, and they're not perfect, by the way. There's lots of critiques you could have of Sweden and other countries, but they're a lot more like we were in the 1970s. No one looks at Sweden or Norway and thinks, oh, these are hellish dystopias. They're places actually with better living standards than us, better public services, and a better welfare state, better childcare. You could go on. And they have strong trade unions that enable workers to have a good share of the welfare creating. So actually, we can see other countries which have done a lot better than us. We're a much more fractured and divided society, where much of the country has just been left bereft. I mean, there were huge problems in the 70s. I'm not going to deny that. But, you can't argue with statistics, Michael. And the fact is we have had lower growth, which is less equitably distributed ever since Thatcherism.
Okay.
That's just a fact.
I won't, I don't out-statistic each other, but as your final departing thoughts, if I can just get you both to just sum up in a sentence for you personally what Margaret Thatcher's legacy was. Owen, I'll come to you first.
A divided, unequal, unhappy country.
Michael?
A country where actually you can't compare us to Sweden and Norway, which have tiny populations and a large
succinct,
area.
Please.
I would say, you know what? I'm looking at the moment at a picture of a mug which is being sold at the Conservative Party conference, and on the mug it's got written a quote of hers: "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money."
Okay.
Actually, it says tea bags on the mug, but it's the fact that people in this country now realise, you know what, you've got to actually make products and provide services that other people
long
want.
sentence,
A sense
Michael.
of realism.
All right, thank you very much, Michael Fabricant, former Conservative MP for Lichfield, formerly Mid Staffordshire, and Owen Jones, Guardian columnist.